Have you ever had that strange feeling of losing your sanity, but in such a gradual and subtle way that you barely notice? I'm not talking about dramatic madness, the kind we see in movies, with screaming and obviously disturbed behaviors. I'm talking about something much more insidious and dangerous, a slow and constant erosion of our ability to concentrate, our capacity to feel genuine satisfaction, our connection to reality. It's as if we're being gently pushed into a permanent state of mental confusion, but with a smile on our face and a phone in our hand. Imagine for a moment your morning routine. You wake up, and before you even get completely out of bed, you're already checking notifications on your phone. Your mind is still processing the awakening, but your fingers are already automatically sliding across the screen, consuming fragments of information that make no sense together. A photo of someone's breakfast whom you barely know, an alarming news story about a crisis on the other side of the world, a funny video of an animal doing something unusual, an advertisement for a product you didn't even know you needed. Within minutes, your brain has already processed dozens of completely disconnected stimuli, creating a mental cacophony that will remain with you for the rest of the day. This is not just a matter of modern distraction. What we are experiencing represents a fundamental transformation in how our species experiences reality and maintains its mental sanity. For millennia, human madness was something clearly defined and identifiable. When someone lost the reason, it was evident to everyone around them. The person talked to themselves, had bizarre behaviors, completely lost contact with consensual reality. Society had mechanisms, albeit imperfect, to deal with these extreme cases. But what happens when an entire society begins to experience a form of madness so normalized that it becomes practically invisible? What happens when the symptoms of mental deterioration are not only accepted, but actively encouraged and rewarded by the economic and social system? We are witnessing exactly this, the first form of collective madness in human history that comes disguised as technological progress and entertainment. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, we need to go back a few centuries in time. In pre-industrial societies, the human mind was adapted to a relatively stable and predictable environment. People lived in small communities where they personally knew most of the individuals they interacted with. The pace of life was dictated by the natural cycles of day and night, seasons, biological processes. Information arrived slowly, usually through face-to-face conversations or occasional travelers. When something important happened, the entire community found out and had time to collectively process the meaning of that event. The human mind, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, was perfectly equipped for this type of environment. Our ancestors developed the ability to maintain focused attention for long periods when necessary, to process information deeply and contextually, to form meaningful relationships with a limited number of people, to find satisfaction in simple but essential activities like preparing food, telling stories, observing nature. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the first cracks in this millennial balance. People were forced to leave their rural communities and migrate to rapidly growing cities. The pace of life intensified dramatically, work became more specialized and repetitive, but even then, there were still natural limits to mental stimulation. When the sun set, activities diminished. When someone was not physically present, there was no way to communicate instantly with that person. The amount of available information, although growing, was still physically limited by the communication means of the time. The real rupture began with the arrival of the internet, but accelerated exponentially with the proliferation of smartphones and social networks. For the first time in human history, we created an environment where mental stimulation never stops, where attention is constantly fragmented, where we are bombarded with amounts of information that exceed by thousands of times the processing capacity for which our mind evolved. And most disturbing, we did this voluntarily and even enthusiastically. Social media algorithms discovered something that psychologists took decades to understand completely, that the human mind is naturally attracted to stimuli that provoke intense emotions, especially those related to fear, anger, envy, or desire. These algorithms were not designed with the deliberate goal of harming our mental health, but rather to maximize the time we spend on platforms, which in turn maximizes advertising revenue. However, the result is the same: the creation of a digital environment that systematically exploits human psychological vulnerabilities. Consider for a moment how our brain's reward system works. During evolution, we developed a sophisticated system based on dopamine release that motivates us to seek resources essential for survival: food, shelter, reproductive partners, social status. This system was calibrated for a world where these resources were scarce and their acquisition required real and sustained effort. When our ancestors found ripe fruits or managed to hunt an animal, the brain released dopamine, creating a sensation of satisfaction and pleasure that encouraged them to repeat these behaviors. The problem is that modern digital technologies hijack this primitive reward system, offering constant and easy stimuli that trigger dopamine release without us having to make any real effort or obtain any genuine benefit. Each like, each comment, each notification activates the same neural circuits that were activated when our ancestors found valuable resources. But unlike those ancestral resources, which were naturally limited and required effort to obtain, digital stimuli are infinite and instantaneous. The result is that we develop a form of addiction that has no parallel in human history. We are not addicted to specific substances, but to artificially induced mental states of stimulation and social validation. We spend hours a day in a state of anxious expectation, constantly checking our devices for the next dose of dopamine. Our tolerance gradually increases, requiring increasingly intense stimuli to produce the same sensation of satisfaction. And when we don't have access to these stimuli, we experience something similar to withdrawal symptoms: anxiety, irritability, sense of emptiness. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this situation is that it comes disguised as normality and even social success. Unlike other addictions, which are socially stigmatized, addiction to digital technology is not only accepted, but actively celebrated. People who spend 10 hours a day looking at screens are considered connected and updated. Teenagers who have thousands of followers on social networks are seen as popular and successful. Companies that can more effectively capture human attention are admired as innovative and valuable. We have created a culture where the symptoms of mental health deterioration are reinterpreted as positive characteristics. The inability to maintain focused attention for more than a few minutes is called multitasking. The compulsive need to document and share every moment of life is seen as social and expressive. The constant anxiety caused by exposure to an infinite stream of alarming information is normalized as being informed. Growing social isolation, masked by hundreds of online friends, is considered a modern and efficient form of socialization. I want to pause for a moment to ask, do you also feel this profound disconnection in your daily life? This sensation that despite being more connected than ever through technology, something essential has been lost along the way? I know it can be difficult to put into words. Many of us carry this weight in silence, believing we are the only ones to feel this particular emptiness. But you are not alone in this. If this feeling resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "I feel this disconnection when," and completing with your personal experience. Your comment might be exactly what another person needs to read today to feel they are not alone in their struggle. Sometimes naming what we feel is the first step to transforming it. The phenomenon we are observing is not limited to individual technology use. It is fundamentally transforming how we function as a society. Democracies around the world are experiencing unprecedented levels of political polarization, not because people suddenly and spontaneously developed more extreme opinions, but because algorithms discovered that polarizing content keeps people engaged for longer. Social movements form and dissipate with disconcerting speed, driven by waves of indignation that spread virally before any fact-checking or thoughtful reflection can occur. We are witnessing the emergence of a completely new form of collective psychosis, where millions of people can simultaneously be convinced of absurd conspiracy theories or mobilized for impulsive actions based on incomplete or distorted information. What makes this situation particularly dangerous is that, unlike the collective psychoses of the past, which were usually limited to specific communities and had relatively short duration, digital collective psychosis is global, persistent, and constantly self-renewing. The fragmentation of attention that characterizes our era is creating a society of people who are incapable of engaging deeply with complex ideas or maintaining intimate and meaningful relationships. We are becoming a kind of cognitive zombies, technically conscious, but functionally incapable of sustained critical thinking or genuine empathy. We react instantly to superficial stimuli, but lose the capacity for deep contemplation that is essential for wisdom and personal growth. This transformation is particularly evident in how we consume information, our ancestors had access to limited amounts of information, but processed this information deeply and contextually. They could spend hours discussing the implications of a single piece of news or event. Today, we are exposed to hundreds of informational fragments per day, but rarely have the time or mental disposition to adequately process any of them. The result is a chronic sensation of being informed, combined with a superficial and often distorted understanding of the events that shape our world. The crisis deepens when we consider its impact on younger generations. Children who grew up completely immersed in the digital environment show alarming levels of anxiety, depression, and attention problems. But perhaps even more worrying is the fact that many of these children can no longer imagine a different reality. For them, constant fragmentation of attention, compulsive need for online validation, and inability to tolerate moments of quiet or boredom are simply normal aspects of the human condition. We are literally reprogramming the human brain in real time, but without any clear understanding of the long-term consequences of this reprogramming. The neuroplastic changes caused by intensive use of digital technology are real and measurable. Studies show alterations in the brain structure of intensive internet users that are similar to those found in people with other types of behavioral addictions. The ability to concentrate diminishes, tolerance to frustration is reduced, and the need for constant stimulation increases. But the most subtle and perhaps most dangerous aspect of this transformation is the erosion of our capacity to experience what psychologists call flow or flow state. This state, characterized by deep concentration, loss of self-consciousness, and sensation that time stops, has always been a fundamental source of human satisfaction and growth. It is in these moments that we create our best art, make our most important discoveries, experience deeper connections with other people, find meaning and purpose in our lives. The modern digital environment makes it almost impossible to achieve these flow states. The awareness that a notification can arrive at any moment, the compulsion to constantly check updates, the fragmentation of attention between multiple simultaneous tasks, all this conspires to keep our mind in a perpetual state of superficial alert that prevents the deep immersion necessary for flow. As a result, even when we have material success or social recognition, many people experience a persistent sensation of emptiness and dissatisfaction. It is important to recognize that we are not just dealing with individual preferences or personal choices. The economic and technological forces that created this situation are systemic and powerful. The largest companies in the world now base their business models on capturing and monetizing human attention. They employ some of the brightest psychologists and neuroscientists on the planet to make their products increasingly irresistible. They invest billions of dollars in research and development aimed specifically at discovering ways to keep people engaged with their platforms for increasingly longer periods. We are essentially in a cognitive war where our attention is the disputed territory. And in this war, isolated individuals armed only with willpower and good intentions are fighting against some of the most sophisticated and well-funded organizations in human history. It is no surprise that we are losing. The situation is further complicated by the fact that many of the benefits promised by the digital revolution are real and valuable. The internet has given us access to amounts of knowledge that would be unimaginable for previous generations. It allows us to maintain contact with loved ones who are geographically distant. It facilitates the organization of social movements and mobilization of resources for important causes. It offers platforms for creative expression and entrepreneurship. It democratizes access to educational and economic opportunities. The problem is not digital technology itself, but rather the way it is being implemented and used. We are seeing a version of technology that has been optimized to maximize short-term profits, not to promote long-term human well-being. It is technology designed to be addictive, not emancipatory. Technology that treats human beings as resources to be extracted, not as people to be served. We need to understand that we are at a crucial inflection point in human history. The next decades will determine whether we will be able to domesticate these powerful technologies and direct them toward purposes that truly benefit humanity, or whether we will allow them to continue eroding our capacity for thinking, connection, and well-being. This is not a technical or economic question, but a fundamentally ethical and existential question about the kind of species we want to be and the kind of future we want to create. The first stage in dealing with this crisis is developing greater awareness about what is happening. This means recognizing that many of the difficulties we are facing, whether anxiety, difficulty concentrating, sense of isolation, or chronic dissatisfaction, are not personal failures, but rather predictable symptoms of living in an environment that is not aligned with our basic psychological needs. It means understanding that our relationship with digital technology needs to be deliberate and intentional, not passive and automatic. We also need to develop new practices and habits that help us recover our capacity for focused attention and authentic connection. This may include regular periods of digital disconnection, contemplative practices like meditation, activities that require sustained concentration like deep reading or learning complex skills, and deliberate investment in face-to-face relationships. These are not perfect or complete solutions, but they are ways to create spaces of resistance within a system that would otherwise consume us completely. On a larger scale, we need to begin demanding that technology companies take responsibility for the impact of their products on mental and social health. This may mean regulations that limit some of the most predatory practices of digital product design, economic incentives for companies to prioritize well-being over engagement, and public investments in research on the long-term effects of digital technology on human cognition and behavior. Perhaps even more important is the need to reimagine our education, to prepare the next generations to navigate this new environment in a healthier and more effective way. This means teaching skills like focused attention, critical thinking, digital literacy, and emotional intelligence from early on. It means creating educational spaces that judiciously balance the use of technology with activities that promote deep cognitive and social development. But fundamentally, this crisis also offers us a unique opportunity to redefine what it means to have a good and meaningful life in the modern era. For thousands of years, human beings have found satisfaction and purpose in relatively simple activities, creating deep relationships, developing skills and knowledge, contributing to their communities, contemplating the great questions of existence. These traditional sources of meaning have not become obsolete just because we developed more sophisticated technologies. In fact, our experience with the digital revolution may be teaching us that these fundamental activities are even more important than we imagined. The sense of emptiness that many people experience, even when they have access to infinite entertainment and constant stimulation, suggests that the human mind needs something deeper than mere sensory stimulation. We need challenges that require real effort, relationships that involve vulnerability and reciprocity, work that has meaning beyond monetary compensation, moments of quiet that allow reflection and integration. The pandemic offered us a preview of what can happen when an entire society is forced to live primarily through digital interfaces. We saw dramatic increases in mental health problems, deterioration of social relationships, loss of meaning and purpose, and a general sense of disconnection from reality. But we also saw inspiring examples of people who used this period to reconnect with what really matters: family, creativity, nature, deep learning. The future does not need to be a linear extension of current trends. We have the capacity to make different choices, both individually and collectively. We can choose technologies that amplify our humanity instead of diminishing it. We can create cultures that value depth over superficiality, quality over quantity, authentic connection over artificial metrics of popularity. This will require courage to go against some of the most powerful trends of our time. It will mean accepting that not every innovation represents genuine progress. It will mean valuing some things that cannot be easily quantified or monetized. Wisdom, contemplation, deep relationships, connection with nature, sense of transcendent purpose. The irony is that by trying to free ourselves from the limitations of traditional human condition through technology, we may have created even more restrictive and destructive limitations. The search for constant stimulation and validation has made us less capable of experiencing lasting satisfaction. The attempt to connect with everyone has left us lonelier than ever. The promise of instant access to information has left us less wise and more confused. Recovering our collective mental sanity will require us to recognize these ironies and make peace with some fundamental aspects of the human condition that cannot be technologically overcome. There will always be limits to what we can know and control. We will always experience periods of boredom, loneliness, and uncertainty. We will always have to deal with mortality and existential meaning. We will always depend on close relationships and sense of community for our psychological well-being. Technology can help us deal with these universal challenges in more effective and compassionate ways. But when we try to use technology to eliminate them completely, we create even bigger problems. The solution is not to reject technology, but to learn to use it with wisdom in ways that honor and amplify our essential humanity instead of denying or undermining it. We are living through humanity's first great experiment with soft and disguised collective madness. Unlike the dramatic explosions of irrationality that marked previous periods of history, our version of collective madness comes with a smile, offers constant entertainment, and promises to keep us connected and informed. It is madness that sells itself as sanity, an addiction that presents itself as freedom, an impoverishment that disguises itself as abundance. Recognizing this situation for what it is not a matter of pessimism or nostalgia for the past. It is a matter of clarity and courage. It is the first necessary step to recover our capacity for clear thinking, authentic connection, and lasting satisfaction. It is the foundation for building technologies and cultures that truly serve long-term human interests. If these reflections have touched something you have been feeling, but perhaps have not found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this continuous journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. The road ahead will not be easy. It will require us to question many of the basic assumptions about progress, success, and happiness that our current culture takes for granted. It will require us to develop new forms of resistance against extremely powerful economic and technological forces. It will require us to recover skills and values that our civilization is rapidly losing. But it also offers the possibility of a richer, more meaningful, and more genuinely satisfying life than anything mere digital stimulation can provide. It offers the chance to reconnect with deep aspects of human experience that have remained constant through all historical transformations. The pleasure of deep contemplation, the joy of authentic connection, the satisfaction of real growth, the peace of wise acceptance. The world may be going gently mad, but our individual and collective sanity does not need to be sacrificed on the altar of misdirected technological progress. We still have choices. We can still change course. We can still create a future where technology serves humanity instead of the other way around. But only if we begin by honestly recognizing where we are and having the courage to imagine and build something different. This transformation will require us to rethink some of the most fundamental concepts that govern our civilization. Take the concept of efficiency, for example. Our culture is obsessed with doing things faster, processing more information in less time, connecting more people instantly, increasing productivity in all areas of human life. But efficiency for what? If we are efficiently destroying our capacity for attention, efficiently eroding our social connections, efficiently generating anxiety and dissatisfaction, then our efficiency has become counterproductive. We need to rediscover the value of deliberate slowness, intentional inefficiency, productive waste of time on activities that do not generate measurable economic value, but that are essential for psychological well-being and spiritual growth. This may seem heresy in a capitalist culture, but the truth is that some of the most valuable experiences of human life are inherently inefficient. Contemplating a sunset, having a deep conversation with a friend, learning an artistic skill, meditating, walking in nature without specific destination. These activities cannot be optimized or accelerated without losing their essence. They require presence, patience, and willingness to be completely in the present moment. They are natural antidotes against attention fragmentation and compulsive rush that characterize our digital era. But our society increasingly treats them as dispensable luxuries or obstacles to productivity, when they should be seen as basic necessities for mental health. The attention crisis is also intimately related to a broader crisis of meaning that permeates our civilization. For thousands of years, human beings found purpose through shared collective narratives, religions, cultural traditions, political ideologies, extended family structures, identification with local communities. These narratives offered not only guidelines for behavior, but also a sense of place in the cosmos, an understanding of how individual life connects to something larger and more enduring. Modernity has fragmented many of these traditional narratives, and the digital revolution has accelerated this fragmentation. Now, we live in a world of personalized micro-narratives where each individual constructs their own reality from customized algorithmic feeds that reinforce their existing preferences and prejudices. This has created a form of collective solipsism where billions of people live in parallel realities that have increasingly fewer convergence points. The result is a society where it is increasingly difficult to establish shared basic facts, much less common values or goals. When each person lives in their own informational bubble, constructed by algorithms that prioritize engagement over accuracy, we lose the capacity for genuine democratic functioning. Democracy requires not only formal institutions of representation, but also a culture of rational dialogue based on shared factual premises. We are witnessing the emergence of something we can call algorithmic authoritarianism, where decisions about what we see, what we buy, who we connect with, and even how we feel are increasingly delegated to automated systems that optimize for metrics that do not necessarily align with our long-term interests. This is a type of social control much more subtle and penetrating than traditional forms of authoritarianism, because it does not require explicit force or obvious censorship. Instead, it works by subtly shaping our desires and perceptions so that our apparently free choices actually serve the interests of those who control the algorithms. The situation becomes even more complex when we consider how artificial intelligence is beginning to permeate all aspects of our digital life. The algorithms that govern our online experiences are becoming increasingly sophisticated, capable of predicting and influencing our behavior with growing precision. They can identify our emotional patterns, anticipate our desires, and present content at the optimal psychological moment to maximize our engagement, this means we are entering an era where our subjective experiences are increasingly mediated by systems that know more about our own mental patterns than we ourselves know. It is as if we were developing a form of artificial collective unconscious that influences our thoughts and emotions in ways we do not fully understand. The implications of this for individual autonomy and personal authenticity are profound and not yet fully comprehended. At the same time, it is important to recognize that not all aspects of this transformation are negative. The digital revolution has also democratized access to educational, economic, and creative opportunities in unprecedented ways. It has allowed marginalized voices to find platforms and audiences. It has facilitated the organization of social movements for important causes. It has accelerated scientific and medical innovation. It has connected people across geographical and cultural barriers. The challenge is how to preserve and amplify these genuine benefits while mitigating the damage to mental and social health. This will require nuance and sophistication in our approach. We cannot simply reject digital technology, but we also cannot passively accept its current manifestations as inevitable or optimal. An important part of the solution involves rethinking how we educate the next generations. The current educational system, developed for the industrial era, emphasizes memorization of facts and efficient completion of standardized tasks. But in an era where factual information is widely available and many routine tasks are being automated, we need different skills: deep critical thinking, genuine creativity, emotional intelligence, capacity for collaboration, ethical wisdom. More importantly, we need to teach children to cultivate and protect their capacity for focused attention. This means creating educational environments that judiciously balance the use of technology with activities that promote sustained concentration. Deep reading, reflective writing, complex problem solving, learning musical instruments, artistic practices, nature contemplation. We also need to help children develop what we can call digital wisdom, the capacity to navigate online environments in healthy and discerning ways. This includes skills like fact-checking, recognition of algorithmic manipulation, screen time management, cultivation of online relationships that are genuinely nourishing, and resistance to artificial social pressures created by digital platforms. But perhaps the most important aspect is helping children maintain connection with sources of meaning and satisfaction that are independent of digital validation. This means cultivating deep face-to-face relationships, developing competencies in physical and creative activities, finding purpose through contribution to causes greater than themselves, and learning to value moments of quiet and reflection. For adults who are already deeply immersed in the current digital environment, change is more challenging, but not impossible. It requires what we can call personal archaeology, excavating through the layers of digital conditioning to rediscover authentic aspects of oneself that may have been buried under years of constant stimulation and external validation. This may include experimenting with prolonged periods of digital disconnection, not just a few hours, but days or weeks. Many people discover that after the initial period of anxiety and restlessness, mental capacities emerge that they did not know they still possessed. The ability to concentrate deeply on a task for hours, to find entertainment in simple activities, to tolerate boredom without compulsive need for stimulation, to be fully present in face-to-face conversations. It may also involve rediscovering traditional practices that cultivate different states of consciousness: meditation, prayer, breathing exercises, contemplative practices from various spiritual traditions, not because these practices are inherently superior to modern technology, but because they develop mental capacities that are complementary to those emphasized by digital culture. Quietness instead of stimulation, depth instead of breadth, presence instead of distraction. The question is not choosing between past and future, but rather integrating the best of both. It is using technology as a tool to amplify our humanity, not as a substitute for it. It is creating a culture that values both innovation and wisdom, both global connection and local intimacy, both efficiency and contemplation. The future of human mental sanity will depend on our capacity to consciously navigate between these poles, choosing when to connect and when to disconnect, when to accelerate and when to slow down, when to seek stimulation and when to cultivate quietness. It will be a skill that requires constant practice and continuous refinement, like learning to play a musical instrument or maintaining a healthy relationship. We are only at the beginning of this great experiment with digital technology and its implications for human consciousness. The next decades will bring developments that we cannot even imagine currently: immersive virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, even more sophisticated artificial intelligence, biological modification technologies. Each of these innovations will offer both extraordinary opportunities and significant risks. Our task is not to try to predict or control all these future developments, but rather to build the wisdom and discernment necessary to navigate whatever future emerges. This means cultivating a deep understanding of human nature, the values we want to preserve and promote, and the difference between change that represents genuine progress and change that simply represents novelty or profitability. In the end, the central question is not technical, but deeply philosophical and spiritual. What kind of human beings do we want to be? What kind of society do we want to create? What kind of future do we want to leave for the next generations? The answers to these questions will determine how we use the powerful tools we are developing and whether they will serve us or whether we will serve them. The soft madness that permeates our era is both symptom and opportunity. It is a symptom of a profound imbalance between the pace of technological change and our capacity for psychological and social adaptation. But it is also an opportunity to develop more mature and wise forms of relationship with technology and with ourselves. It is a chance to consciously integrate the best of ancient and modern worlds, creating something that is genuinely new and valuable. This integration will not happen automatically. It will require intention, effort, and courage. It will require us to question basic assumptions about progress and success. It will require us to prioritize long-term well-being over immediate gratification. It will require us to value human qualities that cannot be easily quantified or monetized. But if we can do this, if we can learn to use technology with wisdom instead of being used by it, we can create a form of civilization that is richer, more satisfying, and more genuinely progressive than anything that has ever existed. A civilization that honors both our capacity for innovation and our need for contemplation, both our global connectivity and our local intimacy, both our efficiency and our humanity.
So what is the most common portrait in the world? What is the most famous face in the history of humanity? It is the face of Jesus. I mean, there are more portraits of Jesus than of any other person in the history of the world. Billions and billions produced over centuries in cathedrals and churches and homes, and fully 100% of them are fictional. There is not a single authentic, truthful portrait of Jesus anywhere. We have no portrait of him from his own lifetime. The Bible doesn't say a single word about how he looked like. There is not a single word in the Bible, whether Jesus was tall or short, dark hair or blonde or bald, nothing. All the images, and it's one of the most famous faces in history, it all comes from the human imagination. And it's still very successful in inspiring people and uniting people. Could be for good purposes, charity and building hospitals and helping the poor, but could also be for bad purposes, crusades, persecutions, inquisitions. But either way, the immense power of a fictional image to unite people.
Most of the information in the world is fiction. If we want to get to the truth, we need to make a special effort. We need special institutions like the media, like universities, like research centers, that they make the special effort, or like courts. In a court of law, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to get to the truth. I hear a lot of people who say that, no, we just need to release all barriers to the flow of information, and the truth will automatically rise to the surface. Exactly the opposite happens. If you just flood the world with information, the truth will sink to the bottom under all this ocean of fantasy and fiction and lies.
Writing history is somewhere in between kind of science and art. To write a history book, it's not an equation. You need to tell stories. So I also, to some extent, I see myself as an artist. And I don't know if I'll still be writing books in 5 years or 10 years, because maybe by the 2030s, AIs will write books like Sapiens and Nexus so much better than me that it will be kind of almost meaningless for a human being to engage in that. The amount of information that I can gather is infinitesimal compared to the AI. Yeah. I've already seen, these wonderful stories written by AI, and I agree that humans will always want to create for the joy of creating, as children do. But would it still be valued? Until today, it's not just that we liked doing it, it was extremely valuable. Nothing on planet Earth could be as creative as us. And now in more and more fields, there is something.